before I bring the panel up here and I introduce you to them, I want to start with two really quick little presentations to sort of set the stage for this discussion. First, we're going to have Anthony Kazub, who, when he's not busy with the AES, is the IP Products Manager for Wardbeck Systems. He's just returned, as he mentioned yesterday, from IBC, where he delivered a paper on the practical realities of deploying audio over IP in production environments. This is a sort of a down-in-the-mud equivalency of what Ron talked about last night when referencing the work of his colleagues in Montreal, which gave us a very high-level or almost strategic overview of the use of media over IP. This is a lot grittier than that. And even though his full paper would consume the length of time we have for this panel, he's agreed to give us a little Reader's Digest version, and then we'll go on to other things. So I will, at this moment, ask Anthony if you would come to the stage, please.
Clicker? A clicker. Well, I'm on 2, I think. Thank you.
Hold that.
Thank you, Josh, front of house. Is it Jake in the back? Jake in the back. I don't know what it's like to have an A2. This is my first time actually having an A2 put stuff on me. So it was a truly unique experience.
No.
So I got to get this.
It's not going to go with Google.
Oh, man. It's not going to go with Google. No. Just hit play. I'll sit right here.
Yeah, good. Play. Go.
That keeps me from moving around the stage a lot.
It's loading.
I only have 50 slides.
Oh, damn it. How do I...
But you can watch this on YouTube at half speed later on. That's my goal.
Yeah, that's clearly not working. It's okay. We are audio guys after all, so struggling with video is...
What's the shortest distance between 2 points?
a shortcut.
A video cable.
There we go. There.
Yes.
How about that?
So you can go to this domain name on your phone if you want, networking.audio. So if you just go to https networking.audio, there is links to all of the things that look like links in this presentation. So before I start, CCBE is coming up actually this Thursday. I'm doing a workshop on AES 67. We're going to play Capture the Flag. So I have 4 teams capturing signals from other people. $75. Gotta shout it out. There's jobs of the future. So there's jobs ahead. So ultimately, we plug this stuff in. It gets preamped. It gets filtered. You patch it. You move it around. You manipulate it. You mute it, right? You just muted it. There you go. There you go. Done. You matrix it to here, here, here. Still a job. You bus it to here, here, here. Still a job. You amplify it. Still a job. And you have to ground it. Still a job. So there's jobs in the domains of audio. I'm working on, I love the AES standards. So in the rabbit holes are rabbit holes. Inside those rabbit holes are more rabbit holes. And this is a rabbit hole I've gone down where I've said, I want to move 4 channels of audio over quad twisted pair cables. So I proposed the standard to standardize moving 4 channels of audio over a CAT cable using both pinout and color coordinations. So we've created a framework for engineers to connect analog and AES equipment using CAT cables and breakout boxes. So this is a standard that I've had help with from other AES members in our section to both proofread technically and grammatically because I write in short form. AES 67, 2013, it's not that old, but it's old. You know, Maddie is pretty old. Maddie is a 25-year overnight success of the audio industry, and AES 67 can be a thing that is a great unifier, as Maddie and all these other things were. Subnet mask, the joke is, it's a big AND gate, you know, and it allows you through. Just think of it as a big AND gate. And this subnet mask, you're allowed through. You have your network, and you have your host. You can have multiple devices on your host. It's an AND gate. The least you should know about networking is this phrase. The physical data link networks transported sessions presented by the application. And how I summarize that is the 7 layers of the OSI model in one sentence. So the physical data link, the thing I plug in, networks these things that are transported based on sessions that I've allowed, presented by these applications, such as a web browser or an audio device. The OSI model includes these 7 steps. So the AES-67, well, is it an application, Lee? It is not an application. Is it not an application? It is a presentation. It is both presentation and it is an application. Applications can generate it. Applications then present that audio or those packets to the network based on a session that I allow to transport over across this network using a data link that is connected through fiber or Ethernet or whatever it is. To have a full stack, you need control, connection management, the transport mechanism, and timing. So controlling and monitoring, there's AES-70, and that can be a whole talk. Discovery, various competing ways to think about that and to manage that. But there's commonalities, the session description. Transport, AES-67. Synchronization timing is an IEEE standard 1588 PTP timing. So it is well established. It's used to micro-synchronize financial transactions on the microsecond level, as well as synchronize power plants that generate sine waves. Think about that. You have to synchronize all the power that's being recontributed to the grid. So this PTP is well established. Let's just say well established. There are ways that you can manage these devices, and how we chose to do it was to make a microservice, which is a Linux-based device. So that can run on practically anything from a Raspberry Pi and up, and that allows you to segment things. So trick question, what grows infinitely as your network grows infinitely? What can grow infinitely as your network grows infinitely? Someone and I had this talk before. Jonathan, thank you very much for pitching in there. Well, why do we segment things? Sorry, I adjusted that. So ultimately, this is the goal. This is what everybody said. Everybody said, hey, look, I want to connect the stage to the front of house, to the broadcast, to the stadium, to the recording studio, to the broadcaster. Boom. I want to have all those things connected. That's the goal. Let's figure out how to do it. Ultimately, SMPTE 2110, which is a video standard, is very inclusive of AES-67 and the work that AES has done. We have Lee Whitcomb here from the SMPTE Toronto chapter, who is heavily involved in making this protocol possible. Ron touched a little bit about this, but essentially SDI is a serialized digital something, and SDI is serialized and then packetized. And once it's packetized, it goes on the network. But SDI is muxed, so there is video in there, there's audio in there, and there's other stuff in there. What 2110 does is they say, look, we're going to take the data, the audio, the SDI video, and those are going to be different multicast streams. So instead of receiving everything in order to extract left and right, all I do is I subscribe to the multicast that is the audio. There are multiple levels of confusion in this, because different vendors do different things, and there's politics behind everything that these vendors do and the decisions they make. There's also technical limitations. So if you want to operate at this sample rate, you have to be within these constraints. Your packet times have to be this. If you want to operate at this sample rate, you have to be able to do this. If you want to use this many channels, you have to do this. So there's a lot of confusion. So there's different ways to do it. I like to call it natty. So leveraging the MADI word is just like the things that are mandatory and the things that are described at the bottom of the 2110 chain are something that we can all agree upon. It's not the lowest common denominator, it's the most common commonality that is valuable to us to get this stuff off the ground. Lee did a truck of 12,000 channels of audio. 18,000 channels of audio. So the numbers are getting up there, and it requires a crazy amount of infrastructure. And these are engineered networks. They're not accidental networks. There's nothing dynamic about it. Everything is under control by engineers who are not audio people. And that's okay, that's cool, because that's what they do. This is a crazy amount of data. Like, this is hundreds of gigabytes of data being moved around all the time. You can run the internet 5 times over on an infrastructure that is required to operate some of the things that happen in these video plants. But everything is slave to these PTP synchronized master clocks. And you can do this on a big scale, you can do this on a small scale. Ultimately, segmentation. With segmentation, you can segment all of that stuff. We did a show, and we split it up into these little segments, you know? You have truck video, truck music. You have the building, you have ambience, you have an immersive mix, and then you have front of house. So these are essentially the nodes that I need to deal with. So this is all of the switches that are on my network. And I'm moving 2110 and AES 67. I'm announcing what is out there based on Ravenna, and I'm controlling it by AES 70. The goal of all of these things is to have how much time do I have left? I'm going pretty quick. I'm going to keep going. Whew, that's pretty good. I'm at like 25, 21. So your set number 1 wants to be there, and your set 2 wants to be over there, and your set 3 wants to be over there, and you want to have multiple control rooms control these all at different times. But you can define this through software. The SDN, software-defined networking, is essentially spreadsheet-defined networking, and I can talk about that too. Ultimately, I find that we're doing an event. There's guests, there's a host. They fall into these pools. You have ambience microphones. Like if this was, we wanted to record an audience, screaming, yelling, we'd have a pool of ambience. We'd have our co-host, we'd have our host, we'd have our guests. And then somewhere there'd be a hardwire backup. There's production playback sources like devices. And then ultimately, we take it over to video and video transmits it. So these are pools. And when I say talking about pools, I don't mean the kind of pool that's in your backyard and sticks up 5 feet. I mean a pool that has these different places you can go to get things. I don't think of audio as a matrix anymore. I think of it like a pool, and this kind of pool, where I can take a can of tomato soup and dump it in here and ultimately grab that same can of soup out from the other end. And that can of soup, the most important thing about it is the label that's on it and the thing that we use to define what is actually in the session that is my can of soup. So we created these websites that you can go to. They're just a Google form-based thing. So you get a pool pass. You want a new device, you got to get a pool pass. So you go to poolpass.aes67.audio. You add in what your device is. You want to add a talent. Well, that's the talent pool, of course. And the talent goes into the pool, and they get associated a profile and something about themselves. A source, like a computer or whatever, that's part of the source pool. And then a talent plus a source is a show. So that's ultimately how we break down these thousands of channels of audio that we seem to be moving around. You can discover these things through Ravenna, Dante, AES 67 supports a session announcement protocol, and then you can actually move around your own SDPs. And this is the thing that allows you to be both right brain and left brain oriented. And you can have a huge level of security within doing that too. If you shut off your announcements, nobody knows you're there, and unless you're subscribed to that stream, nobody knows that connection has actually been made. So there's advantages to that. So a talent, a position, and a show can generate a session description protocol. The session description protocol is this little piece of text that describes what's in the stream. It comes from this IP address, it's named this thing, it's clocking on this domain, it's at this port, it's got this multicast address, and the RTP map is it is linear, 24-bit, 48K, 8 channels wide, and it is synchronized to this clock. The devices, all of these devices speak this common language. It is a very old language. It is from the telco, 100%, but there's things that you can add to it. A good receiver ignores the things that it doesn't care about. So if you ignore the things you don't care about, you can add data to it. And what I want to do is I want to augment that data of like, okay, I got this microphone, it's attached to this guy, this speaker has this MAC address and it's plugged into this thing, the model number, the manufacturer. All of this stuff is actually barcoded in some manufacturer's database, or if I run an inventory, it's part of my inventory database. I just want to leverage that as much as I possibly can. And you get a who, what, where, why, and when. You get who is the person, what are they plugged into, what are their assets, where are they, what device are they plugged into, and when did they get into the network based on their connection to the network switch. Changes the way you can do things. If you want to create mix minuses or mixes directly, I can avoid using a mixing console. So I have my host. on a device that can receive streams and generate a multicast. My host and my co-host receive each other's audio, and I can generate a mix called co-host and host. Well, that's a mix minus. That's a mix minus all my guests. If I take that co-host and host and feed it back to my guests, well, that's generating a mix minus. If I feed my guest to my other guest, I get guest plus guest. There's 5 of us on stage. I just manage this stuff. I don't need to receive hundreds of thousands of channels of audio just to manage 6 people and their mouths. There's different ways that you can do that now that you can programmatically do this. As I proved to Ike Zimble, sorry about your ears, Ike, that this is a feedback machine under my hands and not driven by software. So you have to say to that device, you can never receive something that contains yourself in it, or else you're gonna create some feedback. So the SDP object can also be augmented by positional information. You know, where's that mic, where's it pointing, et cetera, et cetera. You can control it with software. How's my time? Give me a number sometime. Oh, keep going. Animan is a thing that leverages the JSON presentations of certain devices. So certain devices can connect in different ways. So this is Animan controller, and then there's Dante controller. So it's AC versus DC. My money's on the Animan. The Much Music Video Awards was proof of concept that we did with Michael and his team. The goal was to be unobtrusive and pretend to not be there. It's kind of hard because you got a lot of stuff on top of a lot of stuff. A lot of layer ones, right? Everybody had their own layer one. Lighting had their layer one, video had their layer one, times a whole bunch. Again, pools, you know, we had these co-hosts, we had these hosts, microphones, we had ambience, we had to transmit the thing, we had to play it back, we had guests, we had to manage that. So Michael, of course, is Michael, and there was a spreadsheet database called Smartsheet, and that was spread amongst the A2s. And you know, you take out your Sharpie marker and your tape, and you sit there and you label the cable. I said, man, I'm just gonna grab my label printer and print off all the labels. And so we just went, and then just labeled the cables, and poof, that was it. We didn't have to do anything. Our implementation was done before noon, and there was it. I got 1 minute. So Michael threw curveball at us and said, okay, look, we're gonna mix live to Dolby. Can I say Dolby Atmos? So Michael said, okay, we're going to do this live. So he took the post-production tool. This is where the post-production guys are going to win. Post-production tool and used it as a live tool. So his live production became his post-production by sake of just using the same tool to do the same job. That's a big deal. We showed up with 3 road cases, and we wanted to move 100 channels of audio. Sure, I could have put one thing one place and routed 100 channels of audio to it, but I say nay, nay. He gave me a whole bunch of inputs. AES, he said, okay, these are zones. This is where the things are. But we decided that, you know, ultimately, when you're mixing in Atmos, you care about the things that are being on screen. So you got to pay attention to the metadata that is about all of these pools. So we captured GPS information of every microphone, their height and their bearing of it. And we put that into a database, and we can leverage that into the SDP. We hooked everything up through switches that we brought. We leveraged the building infrastructure, so the single mode fiber, the Ethernet was all leveraged. We tried to do a resilient execution instead of a redundant execution. Instead of having 2 of the same thing, we had 2 different things. 2 different things operate differently, they fail differently. Common fail point, power. That's always the fail point. We routed microphones out to the device. The goal was to ultimately put the microphone 5 feet away from the device, install cat cable, chop the cat cable ends, abandon the cable, cheaper for the cleanup crew than it is for the A2 crew to actually pick it up. I received cameras, received all the microphones. This box here can be controlled through a lamp stack, through a Raspberry Pi, so I can actually remote control the on-ramp onto my network. So hundreds of channels of audio, virtual sound cards. I recorded it across 3 computers, positioned at 3 different parts of the building, and I virtual machined into the machines to control them. I distributed LTC timecode over the network through one of the AES-67 ports, and I had Reaper, a $34 piece of software, synchronize all of this through LTC. Metering, monitoring of network switches, extremely important. You have to know what's connected, what's dropped, what's happened, what's going on. But ultimately, it's a talent pool, and you put the device into the pool. We're overcomplicating things by having these redundant networks on top of redundant networks. And if we stop thinking about it as a matrix and think of it more like the can of soup, dumping it into a pool and labeling it what it actually is. The console could take the API presentations, the mixer could take it, the audio recorder could take it, the production monitor could take it. That metadata can be used in other places. So if we combine this metadata into a description of the session that used to be a Sharpie marker and a piece of tape, now I'm saying it's just a database that we leverage as many ways as we possibly can and make announcements with it across the network. So here what I'm showing is I take OCA AES 70 control protocol stuff and I describe my session of my microphone preamp. So OCA attribute. If the receiver, this is truly, am I right? Okay, so if the receiver sees an attribute or anything it doesn't need to adjust or tune itself, it ignores it. And that's a proper implementation. So it ignores more than it takes in, but another part of your CPU or your device can actually take that information and process it differently, but it doesn't change what is being received. So here I'm putting phantom power on, phase inverting, preamp inverting, blah, blah, blah. Sure, it's a lot of data to start with, but you send it the first time, you send it the tree, and then later on you just send it the object ID number and then its value. So you can leverage those things as much as you want, but this is a commonality between all these common deployments. So it's not creating a new standard, it's leveraging the standard we're already using deeper. There are solutions and convoluted solutions and Rube Goldberg machines to handle this stuff. So I'm trying to simplify it. What used to be a piece of tape and a Sharpie marker is part of this session description. So this is the kind of approach I'm taking to some of these problems. And we have a demonstration. Kevin's here from Wardbeck, and we can demonstrate any of that stuff and ask any questions you want. We're local. We're Scarborough, top right corner of Toronto. So door's always open.
Thank you, Anthony.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anthony. Possibly the very definition of drinking from a fire hose. I've heard that presentation or variants of it many times, and I always get something different from it. And now, for something completely different. Let's see. There we are. Go. So, next. David Midgley from Bell Media. In our regular working lives, I have the pleasure of supporting David in his role as post-sound supervisor at Bell Media Studios North in Agincourt. David and his team, I mean, they handle all post-sound for all of our client partners, but principally are focused on long-form factual for groups like Exploration Production, which is our Discovery Channel's in-house production company. And David's going to give us a little taste test here of his learnings over the last 3 years as we've tried to understand how to deploy Dolby Atmos to better support ultra-high definition pictures. And there's a thread that runs through this because the MMVAs, which Anthony just alluded to, is part of this. And these two presentations together form the jumping off point for the panel. So David, come on up.
Well, hello everybody. I'm definitely new to this, my first time. I want to first say thank goodness for people like Anthony on projects like that allow me to just mix. He takes care of all the infrastructure. This is a presentation on our journey into small media format Atmos audio. Our early development, we've had over 2 years kick at it. We first retrofit post 207 at Bell Media into a test bed for next generation audio dimension. We added 8 more speakers, 3 upper LCR speakers, 2 side speakers, and 2 upper rear surround speakers. This has allowed us the early trials of both Oro 3D and Dolby Atmos. Using media at our disposal, such as the 2015 MMVAs, we had 5.1 stems available to us. This allowed us to create an Atmos-type mix in our playground. We adapted this workflow into our Discovery series called Mighty Trains, using object workflow to reposition things like music and narration. Experiences then turned into practices. We're able to place narration up from bed center, giving sonic room for sync, ambience, and effects. Observe that screen-anchored sounds still have to marry position, but anything not seen on the picture is open to unique position and discussion and acceptance. Also gives you much more design latitude for graphic animations, such as flyovers, sticking GoPro cameras on the track. Now sound can travel overhead. Great illustration of sound design for animation. Now canyon reflections can extend upwards. Sound experience immersion is moving further ahead of two-dimensional video. This next played is a Dolby Project representation and graph that accompanied the video. Upwards of 47 objects are represented in amplitude and space over time. So, object-based mixing, 10 objects in a live situation and 118 in a post-mix. Whole other seminar on spatial positioning with content. Now for an episode of Mighty Trains, the music library cues have been repositioned from 5.1 into an Atmos integration, which has 22 stereo instruments repositioned so that it looks like that for any given music cue that we use.
Worth mentioning here, David, that what we're looking at here is each yellow ball is an object, but what's not being seen, because it's just not visualized by the Dolby system in this way, is the 7.1 bed. So in addition to everything you're seeing there, there are also another 8 channels. The only actual 8 channels in the mix is the 7.1 bed, right? So sometimes it looks a little bit peculiarly spaced, and here, for instance, it looks like there's a very weak center because you don't see anything on the screen axis, but it's because the bed is always supporting
These
that.
are only things, the instruments that will potentially move.
Right.
Anything that doesn't move, we never see a visual representation of. So that's what happens with music. This is a representation of our narration and dialogue, which at the moment we've moved up 30% from bed center. On-screen dialogue elevated as well, 30% up from bed center. This typically gives the illusion of dialogue coming from screen center, either through an Atmos soundbar at home or full Atmos 714 reproduction. Speakers, if not behind the screen, which is rare, are typically found underneath. So elevating the narration and dialogue gives it that perception. And on location, in addition, we have a Neumann Aspera 2 capsule recording, which we extract to 5.1 and reposition for ambiances in 7.1. That led us to the 2018 iHeartRadio MMVAs. There was a live and post-mix endeavor. Challenges were 3 situations. Evaluate the difficulty of a live Dolby Atmos mix. What's the impact on the broadcast mix? And the recording consideration for a Dolby Atmos post-mix release. Excuse me. Which brings us to infusing into a large mix suite at $299, the bed 7.1 speaker complement, plus 4 overhead speakers mounted on a temporary truss. For the music element, we had splits from 2 music production trucks. We had the lead vocals separate, 30% up from bed center. We had supplemental vocals and backing vocals matching the lead position, and a mix minus vocals band bed placed LCR, left side, right side. Audience, almost 30 mics over IP to audience mix control with Chris. They gave us an Atmos mix, a 7.0 bed stream, and a 4.0 overhead stream, plus 2 roof mics, 100 feet up, front, center, and front, rear. Front, center, rear, center. Plus an Asphyra stereo mic, which they used in their 5.1 mix as left rear surround, right rear surround, and in post we decoded it to 4.0 and placed it as left rear, left top, right top. All audience mics positioned in the Atmos arena reflected where they were actually deployed. Just retimed to provide a tighter impulse relative to the stage performance mics.
I'll give you a chance to take a breath there, David. The
Going
point
too
to that, go back one. The point to this was that up the other way, there you go, down one. I don't know which way you're going, doesn't matter. This was a POC. So we were doing this in parallel with the conventional HD 5.1 telecast. And there are 10 A1s working on this show, 10 mixing consoles. Only one of them, your stage, was going to be Atmos equipped or plus height equipped. We couldn't afford to do anything that was going to jeopardize the main telecast. But crucially, we wanted to know whether it was possible to extract a viable plus height or next generation mix from the effort of the other guys who are still working conventionally. And what our 2+ years experience of mixing previous shows off of multitrack, as you said, with the 2015s, or whether it's hockey or football or whatever, is to identify that without changing anything at the field of play, and simply by reproducing the content we were already going to have, but in a different place, we got a much different experience, yeah? So all of those microphones in all of the previous editions of the Video Awards have been there.
Right.
But they've been summed to a flat 5.1 image for the last number of years. They still did that for the main telecast. Chris Berry and I were in the dome truck mixing the conventional telecast, while you and Howard were in the Atmos room. You were simply consuming the component parts of Chris's sum. So we didn't have to change anything. We didn't have to rebuild a whole bunch of rooms. We didn't need a bunch of new gear. We specifically didn't need to do a bunch more stuff at the field of play. And that's a crucial thing to point out.
Right.
That you don't have to reinvent the wheel in order to get to these next generation formats necessarily.
Yeah, totally. Recorded all our sources in both Pyramix and Pro Tools with an HD video recording and media composer via DNX-IQ. This gave us the ability to play back any rehearsals to fine-tune a better live broadcast Atmos mix. Dolby differences. In live Atmos mixing, there are physical boxes, a 591 audio encoder for configuration parameters, a Dolby 590 authoring processor seen here with object panners, metering, loudness measurement, and monitor switching, as well as a 580 reference decoder not shown. Live, this allows for 10 objects in a 5.1.4 configuration. In post-Atmos mixing, it's through Dolby rendering software and monitoring software, which allows for 118 objects in a 7.1.4 configuration. In conclusion, success in creating a live Atmos mix with minimal impact to conventional broadcast process, as Michael pointed out. Definite applications for Dolby Atmos mixing in a broadcast or streaming or pay-per-view environment. Object-based mixing and authoring opens up future entertainment applications, such as sports. Consumer has selectable options, remove or reposition commentary. In drama, consumer selectable changes in mix parameters for the hearing impaired individuals. Or live event, a truly all-immersive audience experience, whether it be in the home or in a Dolby Atmos compliant cinema. Thank you.
Thank you, David. That's great. Why don't you just wander up there and have a seat? Great. Thank you so much. Okay. There. Let's just put that up there and leave it be. Okay. Good. And now the rest of the panel. So, guys, everybody who's on the panel, where are you all hiding? Chris, Lee, Ron, Damien, come on up, and I'll bother to introduce you. Well, firstly, you've already met David. David is our post-sound supervisor. David is enjoying still a 38-year and counting career in broadcast audio. Spent the first 10 years or so working in drama and sort of production, including outside broadcast, and since then has been almost exclusively in post. Next, Chris Sampson, who I specifically said I would thank for stepping in at the last moment. Chris is the junior guy in the panel. He's only 9 years in, but he's going to give us an interesting perspective because Chris is a dual role mixer. He's one of the few guys I know who is frequently on both sides of the post-production equation. So he's just as happy sitting in a post suite as he is, mixing the news or something like that. And that's fairly unusual even in our organization. Damien Kearns is next. What do I have to say about you, Damien? Damien is currently self-employed as a sound designer, editor, mixer, running his own facility, but has a storied career that started in Vancouver at places like Pinewood Sound in Vancouver. 15 and a bit years at the CBC here in Toronto.
Actually, I started at Sounds Interchange, then went to Deluxe, then went to Pinewood, and then
back to the
Toronto
CBC.
hired me.
Excellent. And you've been out on your own since 2013.
Yes.
Fantastic. Next, Ron, who we all, of course, met last night and did a spectacular job. Ron, you started at Manta in '79, yeah?
Graduated in '79.
Oh, graduated
Manta
in
in '81.
Ah, okay. And then joined the CBC in '95,
Yep.
where you are currently the senior
Still there.
post-audio mixer, or engineer, rather. A whack of Gemini and CSA nominations, including a bunch of trophies sitting on your mantle. That's awesome. Lee Whitcomb. Lee is an architect with Imagine Communications. Importantly to this discussion, he's also the chair of the Toronto section of Society of Motion Picture and Television Engineers. He's very active in standards development, as Anthony pointed out. He's got a raft of degrees, and interestingly holds, or is the co-inventor of some patents in the area of timing and synchronization. Lee's really standing at the coalface in terms of all of this IP stuff. And last, but most assuredly not least, David Rowe, a former colleague of ours, but now with Chorus Entertainment at Global Toronto as a team lead or engineering supervisor on the news engineering, news technology side. The bulk of David's 26-year career thus far has been on the craft side as a picture editor and a colorist. Some of the finest eyes I've ever encountered. David was a spectacular colorist. But of late, you're on the engineering side of the equation.
Yeah.
I'm eager to see, I'm eager to talk about what that means and what your experience is like relative to this panel. So, here we go. And let me calibrate myself for time. Yeah, there we are. Damien, I want to start with you. Sorry, I should say, in preparation for this panel, I asked everybody, all except Chris, who just joined us today, but I asked everybody to answer two questions for me. One, identify something that you're super excited about, either now or in the near future. And two, identify something that you would call a pain point, something about our current reality or maybe expected future that is, is something you would change if you could. right? Or something that you could, if you had a silver bullet for it, that you'd sort out. So, with that as the preamble, Damien, I want to start with you.
All right.
You mentioned that one of the things that excites you a lot right now is that the field is open for all comers, that it's not just big companies dominating the landscape. Now, especially since you're a post-production practitioner, you're working inside the box. By that, the company thing, you mean sort of plug-in developers, for instance, but for that matter, microphone companies. And the point is that the ecosystem now contains players of all size. You know, on the internet, no one knows you're a dog. And when you're buying a plug-in, you don't know whether you're buying it from an enterprise scale company or from someone who coded it in their basement. What about that specifically is interesting to you?
Do you mind if I stand?
Please.
Much better talking while I'm walking. Like for me, what I found is when I left CBC 5.5 years ago, I had to find a niche for myself, and one of those niches immediately was, I was actually found on the web by Isotope. They approached me because I made a comment about one of their pieces of software, and they said the very next day they invited me to the beta group. So I got in on the ground up, with RX5, and I've been there. The latest version of RX7 has just come out. What I found was there were companies out there who weren't doing things the traditional way, that is recycling 27-year-old plugins like Waves. They were actually trying to make new things, bring in groups of people to rethink and reimagine how things are processed. There are also companies out there like Townsend Labs who have made a mic called L22, which I showed Michael a couple of months ago when he was at my house, that in conjunction with Universal Audio model a lot of microphones very well. And I was actually in with them on the ground up when they did their Indiegogo campaign. So I bought number 30 of their microphone, and now they've sold thousands. There's a potential to reach out to companies that are starting, or in the case of Isotope, that are kind of established but want to push to the next level that we never had in the old days when it was all about here's the software, here's the update, and you're going to buy the next version of Waves because we're really one of two major companies out there who make product. Now you're dealing with things like if you want to Google something, Google Sound Radix, and they make a thing called Auto-Align Post. They're a tiny company that have kind of started into the field of post-production. They started essentially in music. Now they're giving you a tool to take that boom mic and phase align it automatically with the lav mic. So in post-production for us, it's huge. The movie of the week I'm working on right now, I don't have to worry about whether I want to use the boom or the lav. I can use both because the phase alignment is there. As I move away from the boom mic, the time is being dynamically aligned. These kind of boutique plug-in things out there are fabulous, and these companies are tiny, but they're pushing the envelope. And when I'm working with Isotope, who are now, they've sold upward of 2 million pieces of software, they won an Oscar, I am sending them links to micro companies going, look at what Synaptic does with their D-Reverb. It's the best D-Reverb on the market. When we do RX8, we're going to look at things like what Sound Radix is doing, what Synaptic's doing. What we're not looking at is what Waves is doing. We're not looking at things like that at all because these things are stayed. So we want to get back to the question, fundamentally answering quickly your question, which is essentially what am I excited about? I'm excited about the prospect of not having to use the same old companies for the same old signal processing all the time. I want to be able to move on and get new tools that haven't been thought of before. And what irritates me, and it irritated me when I was overseeing a couple of upgrades or asked for my opinion, is seeing people wanting to rebuy the same software 7 years down the road every time an update was available. There is a lot more out there right now that you can actually put your hands on that will do a job better than you've ever done it in your life. You just have to open your eyes and ears. So thank you.
All right. I guess I'll bend that a little bit sideways before we go on to my next topic. Chris, you're closest potentially to feeling the pinch from a historical difference in capabilities.
Okay.
We've always taken it as read that if you're sitting in a live production chair, you're the A1 for the news or any other live telecast, that your capabilities when it comes to finely mangling audio is dramatically limited relative to what the expectation would be on you if you're sitting in the post chair and you have all of the time in the world and a whole bunch of really fancy tools. So the expectation would always be that, the post suite is the Mayo Clinic and the production seat is a MASH hospital.
Yeah.
Right? So, and you're closest to feeling that pinch because you move back and forth. So can you talk about what it feels like to be in one place or the other? And
Well, I feel like I can speak more specifically to the benefits of working in both pools, because in the live environment, it gives you a better corrective sense of what is possible. And working in the live world compared to the post world, available time to finish a specific product is shrinking. So you need to be able to work more quickly to deliver on time, still maintaining that post-produced standard.
right, okay. Lee, I talked a little bit about the much ballyhooed threats to conventional broadcasting or to the broadcasting business. And it seems to me that the solutions to whatever those challenges are at least in part going to be technical in nature because it's a technological medium. And so simultaneously we're undergoing this transition to IP, and I think it's maybe arguable, but I'm going to just submit that that's probably the final technical evolution that we have to undergo, because once we're all IP, everything else after that is probably just a detail. But it's causing a lot of strife right now amidst all of the other pressures on us. So since you're really close to this IP thing in general, 2 questions, and the first one might be trite, so you're welcome to skip over it. A, is IP worth being excited about? And 2, what's your confidence level about our ability as an industry to get over this hump, to get migrated?
Yeah, so definitely, I mean, as we move to IP, there's lots of benefits that come from it. So we can have our video and audio on the same network. It allows a lot of flexibility. So if you want to create a new channel for the Olympics, so like in Brazil, they wanted to have like tons of channels, which they just temporarily set up. As we move to IP, I'll stand up too, it's easier. As we move to IP, it allows a lot of flexibility. So you may not see, especially initially, a lot of cost savings, but it adds huge flexibility. So you can spin up a new channel, you can tear that channel down. So for like your MMVA and stuff, it's very easy to set up these temporary things. So there's lots of good power that comes from this. The one thing which we have to sort of do is a lot of training, because there's different ways of doing things, and we sort of have to accept that things are a little different than we did in the past. One that sort of has come up a few times with some customers is things like, say, in the area of timing. When we had sort of traditional systems, you had your analog black burst, which had perfect timing. Every H edge was right on top of each other. As we moved to sort of a PTP system, there's a little bit of wander. And as we wrote the standards, as we went through a lot of practical things, this was perfectly okay. We worked out in a modern system, is a little bit of wander in your reference okay? Because that's, as you use PTP, that's what it does. And so now we have like this sort of education thing where you have the sort of old school engineers saying, it's got to be right on that, and where in a modern system it doesn't. So in addition to all the sort of technological training, of how to use IP and understanding all the net masks and multicast and all that stuff. There's also education has to go on to what is acceptable. And as we move to the new systems, things that you thought had to be done this way, you have to sort of understand that there's some flexibility there. So there's definitely a lot of education which has to happen in the industry between just learning the standards, learning the new ways of doing things. Now, as Anthony was pointing out, I mean, a lot of the same functions still exist. I mean, you've got mixers and inputs and all the speakers and stuff. So a lot of your workflow stays the same, but how you do that workflow is very different. And that's what sort of the IP enables, is making your workflows a lot easier, which then even allows you to sort of think of new and cool ways you can do things and new capabilities that you didn't have in the past, you can now do. So.
Okay. Well, your comment about education is, well, let me spin it sideways to you, David, because you're sort of occupationally just right now, given that the rest of the panel push faders for a living. You're closest to Lee. I was going to say fader monkey, but anyways, I is one, so I could say it. You referenced in some of your comments to me when I sent out that blast about this us and them struggle. And I think in your case, you meant sort of traditional broadcast engineering with an uppercase E versus IT and network engineering. And we heard some of this discussion yesterday, in fact. The education thing sort of hits it right squarely on the head. Can you talk a little bit about what you're experiencing right now in that regard?
Well, outside of the design and infrastructure of IP solutions, we're still dealing with a backbone of, like an IT backbone. Traditionally, and in some places, you have two separate, completely different ecosystems for the networks. You've got your engineering network, you've got your corporate network. Well, what we're seeing, at least in my experience, they're coming together. So you're having to interface and deal with IT professionals who are brilliant in their own right, but very focused on one thing, and that is maintaining the systems, maintaining the security of the systems, based off of using word processing and email. A lot of the broadcast systems who are now being introduced to that same network, same core, which means same security, they don't play as nice. They have very succinct, very specific requirements for the computer setup, say the version of Java. And then when IT will push to all the computers on their network, because it's not two separate networks necessarily, half the system is broken. And in a live situation, that's not good. So that's one thing we're working through, and they're starting to understand, but there still is that, well, this is IT, no, this is broadcast engineering. And the two worlds are mashing. Now, we've been at this well over 10 years. Yet there's still those two camps of this is our responsibility. Well, unless it's broken, then it's our responsibility.
Right.
But that's a big frustration, and it's an on-air danger. And we've had it happen multiple times and multiple times recently.
There's a very long tail. That education is going to have a very long tail. I mean, the subtext of Anthony's presentation here is that, and anyone who's heard him talk recently, he'll go on endlessly about it. Is that, the database is the thing. Everything else is a detail, right? And he's not wrong. But I know you and I, in your former life when you were with Bell Media, we've witnessed times when the guy that you needed to fix the problem was the resident SQL expert. But he works in a cubicle, and his last gig was at an insurance company, and before that he was at a bank, and before that he worked for Ford. He can run the wheels off a SQL database, but he hasn't the first clue about what's happening, at the coalface.
Yeah.
Now, mostly he doesn't care, but sometimes it matters.
Well, they're very, like a lot of the IT, the entire industry has to be very disciplined. Like, you can't be the Wild West or nothing works. Whereas still traditionally in some of the broadcast engineering sides, we wear a Colt on the side, and we just go in, change a bunch of things. It's fixed, you're on the air, we're out of here.
Let's see who yells.
Yeah, and operations has come to expect that kind of response when something's going wrong, when they're on or about to go on air. But then if it's an IT where their infrastructure is based off of tickets and escalation, when we don't get responses like, I need you to fix that now, what's now mean? Tomorrow? Like, that's the kind of, that's now.
Our service level agreement with your business unit says
Yeah.
that we'll respond within 12 hours. Right.
Yeah. Can I also jump in there?
Yes, please.
Yeah, so the other thing too you see is that, I mean, you have sort of say the corporate IT people, they understand networking in a certain way. But as we look at sort of the broadcast side, I mean, things like multicast, that's a critical part of the sort of live audio and video, where multicast is sort of a very foreign topic to most sort of IT individuals. So even though, yes, they both live on the same network, they're very sort of different parts of the switch, different parts of the network that are being used. So that also adds sort of that conflict of different education, different expectations, and different sort of training that's going on there.
And that's actually working to our advantage in a lot of cases. The fact that multicast is so foreign to many of those networking practitioners, you end up then, at least in our place, we end up dealing with this sort of self-selecting group of guys in the networking team who actually understand it, because if you just call the guy who's on the help desk, he goes, whoa, I don't know anything, you're gonna have to go talk to so-and-so. So at least at the moment, you don't have someone sort of trying to meddle, but anyways. Your answers to those two questions I asked were both symmetrical and very common, not maybe surprisingly. A bunch of you talked about an excitement about new technology equaling new capability, new capacity, whether that extends to include new formats. In other words, better and different ways of responding to the picture to enhance the experience of the viewing public. Now, the biggest countervailing force against that excitement is cynicism about the reaction to it, whether that's reaction from our own midst, people who are cynical about the new stuff, whether that's reaction from the client, why do I need that? Or from the audience, or people projecting onto the audience as cynicism. Sort of a modernized continuation of the why do you need five loudspeakers, you only have 2 ears? That insane comment that drives us all to distraction. Ron, what's the most exciting thing as you look forward in this regard?
It's a really good question, and I think the thing that has changed the most over my career, since '81, is just the possibilities for high quality delivery, and we've talked about this before, we've always strived to create the highest quality content possible, recordings, film scores, post-production, all that kind of stuff. Very lucky to work with people like Cy Potma, who had this quest for quality all the time, and that's something that never goes away. You're always trying to create at the highest possible level, and Josh talked about this yesterday in his keynote. The quest should be to always create at the highest possible quality. And there used to be this sort of self-defeating idea that, well, if it's only going to be listened to on a compact cassette, why are we bothering about it? Or if it's going to just play back on AM radio and mono, why do we care? And I don't know, if you're like me, you're allergic to mono. Now we have stereo music delivery services like Tidal that broadcasts or streams full 2496K master files that sound phenomenal. You've got digital delivery services where you can download, like HD tracks, like Pro Sound Masters, a number of them where you can buy the files, keep them on your computer, play stuff super high quality, and it sounds amazing. But there's also the possibility of delivering that kind of quality in the future over the internet through Netflix or whoever ascribes to it. The new ATSC3 standard, which you know all about, which has built into the delivery spec Dolby AC4, which is a 7.1+4 channel format, a very high quality audio format, allows you to mix in full immersive sound with very high quality audio, wide dynamic range, all that kind of stuff. That when you mix in that format and as it's being broadcast, it'll be picked up by whatever you're playing it on and interpret which version of that signal to play for you, whether it's your full 7.1+4 home theater system, built in your basement with a big screen and all that kind of stuff, or whether you're listening to it on your iPhone with headphones, and it delivers the Dolby Atmos and as a headphone signal.
Binaural.
Yeah, it gives you that full same kind of experience, but also set up in such a way that it makes sense with that device. So I think it's fantastic now that we're at the point where you can actually work and still try to achieve that super high quality, immersive, all that stuff, and it's like you can do that and know that it's going to be available to the end user, to the listener, to the audience, in one form or another, and that is definitely coming down the pipe. So,
David, I mean, we saw your presentation that briefly condensed a couple of years of experience, but maybe just give us a thought along the same lines, because when it's not a live show, which admittedly was, a bit of a science experiment, and when it's not standing up here trying to present something about it, you're normally sitting in a fairly calm, controlled environment where you have the benefit of both an all-stop button and an undo. What's it feel like to work in that immersive environment relative to the last nearly 20 years that we've been working in Flat 5.1?
There's nothing like it for anybody who's experienced it at an Atmos theater even, but in a small room that we have in comparison to a theater, there's nothing like it. Having the ability to move things object-based anywhere in the room and have that wide a deployment of sound field coming back to you is incredibly immersive. You can go from 5.1, 7.1, then to Atmos, and it's like 5.1, very nice, that's what we're used to. 7.1, wow, that much better, that much fuller, that much broader. And then Atmos, which literally lifts the ceiling off, is totally immersive. And so, I mean, it's the best place so far that we could ever strive to get to.
Okay, now let's ask the really important question. Because part of the cynicism that comes back, especially at early adopters, about something like Atmos, and we hear from lots of people, hey, look, yeah, 5.1 was fun. Lots of broadcasters threw themselves down that particular rabbit hole, but they found something gnarly and with teeth down there, and so they've crawled back out of the hole. Some have, anyways. And, there's not so many 5.1 systems in homes anyways, and, when we talk to our sports partners, hey, look, the sound's always turned off in the bar anyways. You've had to learn, we've all had to learn how to create a 5.1 mix that when we hit the fold down button, we don't hate what we hear.
Yeah.
Now tell us, you're mixing in Atmos, you still only have one mix. It actually doesn't have a format until you listen to it, right? Because you're not summing these things. You don't have a mix until you're listening to it, and your renderer, your decoder is listening in Atmos mode, and then you press the 5.1 button. Is there a difference between that, which you experience when the render is in 5.1, versus what you expect from a mix if you had created it in 5.1 to begin with? In other words, is there a cost to this?
Cost, no. I don't think there's a cost at all, and I don't know how they do it. But as it turns out,
It's magic.
it's the magic box from Dolby Labs. what we found in comparisons we've done is the 5.1 end product from a Dolby Atmos is better than the 5.1 product you could have done natively. And it holds true to a stereo, and we don't want to call them down mixes because it's not truly a down mix. We believe it's some kind of a convolution of taking 12.1 and making it into 2.0.
It's a render into a 2-channel stereo
It is.
space.
Yes, with a giant set of algorithm elements that is beyond my comprehension, failing math in grade 12. But sonically,
You and me both, brother.
sonically, here's what's the test of time, is there's something better about the 5.1 in stereo created from the Atmos than there is in a true stereo. The difference is detail. The difference is sonic representation. Things sound clearer, better, punchier. Pick an adjective that's going to fit. There's just something about it that you go, wow, I like that better. Couldn't tell you how they do it. They're not going to tell us how they do it. But we look forward to breaking it such that how bad an Atmos mix does it have to be before the stereo version sucks? And
Right.
because it didn't take long in mixing in 5.1 and not monitoring in stereo, if we just mixed in 5.1 and played a stereo down mix with the coefficients in it and went, oh crap, we're missing them.
Well, anyone who's ever listened to a football game and
Well,
not been able to hear the commentary is
that's the end product, right?
symptomatic of that. Yes.
Right. So that's where we've been. And so we haven't so far been able to create worst case scenario.
Okay.
So can I ask Dave to elaborate on that? When you're deconstructing the music for like a mega speeder, or Mighty Trains or something, and you're placing those elements in that Atmos environment, do you find that you're spending as much time on corrective EQ to solve the problem of frequency masking that you would normally get from a traditional summing situation?
If I have the time, I have made changes.
Yeah.
But not out of absolute necessity, out of can I make it better?
Yeah.
But out of the box, it's more than it was before.
Yeah.
So yeah, I found myself going back and changing a few parameters in the Atmos mix that will maybe make the stereo better.
Yeah.
But the stereo was damn good to start with.
So Chris, I'll just stay with you for a second before we change gears. On the video awards, you and Dave Tedesco were responsible for ambience and effects.
Yeah.
We gave you the same amount of time that you've had every year. We gave you the same number of resources that you've had every year.
Yep.
We gave you the same equipment that you've had every year. In this case, working on a console that didn't sprechen Sie 7.1 or
Sure.
anything higher than 5.1.
Yeah.
It was German, that's why I said sprechen. Anyways. And yet we gave you a list of requirements of what we needed out of you at the end of that fixed time interval.
Sure.
With all of those assets to provision both the conventional mix and this next generation mix.
Yeah.
Was it a hardship? Was it trivial? Did you find that you were going home with a headache every night?
No, I mean, obviously, in that particular scenario, the console wasn't configured for that kind of a deployment, so some creativity had to be sought after to just decide how to allocate the available buses that I had and where I could utilize direct outs without having to take up the few number of buses that I had available. But in a lot of cases, I could just, before we got started, we had a discussion about the strategic deployment of how we were going to place the microphones with the end result in mind. We stacked our quads directly up above our primary, we had a high quad and a low quad that we placed coincidentally to supply that end product, right? So then when it came down to, direct outs for the 4 highs and then me panning out my 5.1 image that you guys upmixed to 7.1 to spread around, plus the height landing in the 5.1 field. But again, just direct outs for those mics back to you guys. And then, like, beyond burning a couple of calories thinking about it, like, we were able to just supply our 5.1 mix to you guys the same way we always would at the end of the day.
Great.
Similar situation with the music production trucks, though.
Yeah.
That they needed to configure things a little differently,
Yeah.
but it wasn't out of their realm of possibility to deliver.
No, and we knew that specifically those guys were going to have no tolerance for something that was going to impact their workflow, not especially since it's a steady diet of A&R guys and management and the artists themselves coming into those trucks and auditioning the mixes. And, if there was anything even slightly askew or amiss, or they were hunting and pecking in the console because we'd asked them to do something different, we knew the gig would have been up. So. Okay, I want to change gears. This is the flip side of some excitement about the future. Audio as an afterthought for many people in our lives. This notion that there's still a certain, stigma is maybe the bad word, but there's certainly a resistance, even amongst our clients who otherwise know that we have their best intentions at heart. And clients who could never point to a single time over your respective histories with them where you let down the side or where audio didn't, do the best job it could in supporting their objectives. There's still this resistance to us, sort of being treated as equal partners at the creative table sometimes. And several of you mentioned this. And maybe it's because everyone's, got all this downward pressure on them. And nickels are manhole covers these days. But it seems like we're measuring value some days by using a yardstick that's labeled "how bad is good enough," in a way that would never be tolerated by the picture department. So before I get to you guys, I want to start with this idea at this end of the table, because really, picture gets, picture's the real big McCoy, And it is true that very often, a former boss of ours, was fond of constantly saying, audio is only 10% of the product and 90% of the problems, right? He was one of those "you only have 2 ears" guys, but anyways.
We're holding for lighting, but we're waiting on audio.
Listen, thunder follows lightning. Even God waits for audio. Why should he be any different? So, Lee, because you work with so many content creators and broadcasters all over the place, not just in your working life, but also in your SIMPTE role, could you typify a sense broadly about the importance of audio as a part of the equation?
Yeah. Audio is obviously very important. So TV without audio wouldn't be all that exciting.
Be radio.
It'd be radio. Well,
Or no, sorry, the opposite. Sorry.
it'd be the opposite, but yes.
Surreal.
But yeah, I think if you're looking at like a production truck, they've got video areas and audio areas. So audio is definitely a very important part. It's different, but it's important for sure.
Okay, well, David, you've spent the bulk of your career as a video editor who, well, by definition, a video editor in television anyways is an audio generalist, not a specialist. You're required to deal with it. You can't do your job without it. Most days over the course of your career, you were probably solely responsible also for the audio because you didn't have the luxury necessarily of, especially in fast turn production environments, of handing your work over to a post-sound specialist after the fact. And now you don't work in post. Now you're not a craftsman. Now you're working, you've switched teams, as it were. So now you're on the engineering side, and importantly, you're responsible for supporting all of it. So have you experienced a delta between those two realities?
Well, I'm probably guilty of using some of those axioms in a derogatory way. However, in my current role, I take it all back. I really do. I've had a crash course in deep audio, everything from acquisition to distribution and broadcast, live and in post. And the last number of months, I've really gained a huge respect for the craft and the architecture side of it, the engineering side of audio. One thing I've noticed that's really interesting, I mean, I have no problem finding, deducing issues with the video. It's pretty straightforward. Someone's saying, the straight line and the video cable. Yeah, and that's basically it. Audio's not that easy and to diagnose issues.
I've been telling you this for years.
And then the other thing, too, is in an engineering shop, we have, say 7 guys who can know where every video line goes, and maybe 1 who knows what's going on with audio. And that's usually the operator, right, the head operator. Most of the problems you have to go, okay, oh, how do we fix that? I don't know, go see Henry or go see Mike. And that's the big thing. The craft, there's also 1 video signal and 8, 10, 12, 20 audio tracks, channels. And so there's a lot more to think about. It's more cerebral. Like video, you got an issue, you turn on, hey, it's breaking up. Audio, there's issues. Where the hell could it be? It could be a number of things. It's going from analog to digital, and encoded, de-encoded, muxed, demuxed. What's going on with the audio? So I've noticed the audio is, again, the importance of it is without it, there is no show. That's for sure. You can get away with breaking up video. People have a tolerance for video breaking up and still tuning into the program. But I tell you, you get bad audio, people tune out. And there's just not as many people who know how to diagnose and fix these problems and fix them quickly.
Yeah, we always said, I don't know that any audience relations department has ever taken a call of complaint wanting to chew someone's ear off about bad gamma in the picture.
As well, I've also noticed the ones who do participate in the engineering side of the audio, usually it's somebody who's working in the audio department on the operations side. They know more about their craft and their technology than their video counterpart. I've worked some really good TDs, but they don't know the fundamental aspects of the video side nearly as well as the audio guys do. So as I said, in my current role, I've gained such a respect for that side of the craft that I knew, but I wasn't responsible for. So I let the pros take care of that.
A good example of that is when you and I started picture editing, if you didn't know A, how to read, and B, how to use a waveform monitor and a vector scope, that was it was a self-correcting problem because you were going to be flipping burgers. But how many working editors today below a certain age even look at the scope or turn the rasterizer off?
Oh, I've walked into many suites recently, and there is no scope.
Good, even better.
Yeah,
There's
So
a
much
recent
cheaper.
phenomenon has been, one of the shooting styles for video is log and LUT, right? So you shoot in the mode in the field in log mode, you decode it and strand it out with a LUT in video. But oddly, some producers started going, "Hey, I like that log look." I'm like, "What do you mean?" "Well, the blacks aren't black and the whites aren't white. It looks really neat." So yeah, you're using 30% of the available voltage. "Yeah, it looks neat. Let's go with that." And then you turn on TV now, and every third commercial has this really compressed look. And I'm looking at it going, why do people like that? Why don't I just rip out your speakers and put in a little tweeter and then listen to it that way? It's the same sort of thing. So,
Because it's easier, David.
So one of the things too, as we move to IP especially, is that it also gives us a lot more tools to sort of diagnose problems, but it also allows us to break things in new and exciting ways. So that's the one thing with IP, we also need a lot more sort of education and thinking about. I mean, you don't just have that simple patch panel, you don't just have that simple bar. I mean, because all the signals are available in the network, you could be grabbing something at the very wrong spot, or something's gonna have audio video lip sync, and it's yes, the tools could compensate for audio lip sync through all the devices, but maybe one of them isn't, and tracking it down can be also a lot harder with the new systems.
But the new systems or the new formats anyway, they're broken out. So you've got your video as a stream, as a packet. You've got all your audio.
Yeah.
Something currently right now with the technologies, or some of the technology we're using, you want to get that audio there, you've got to go through a de-embedder of some sort. And if you're just doing audio from a video source, do you want to bring in something that has to read the audio and the video to get the audio out?
Yeah.
Well, that's
So we can make much smaller products to do the same job and get that audio where you need it to go.
Oh, exactly. I mean, that's all the new flexibility and the power by having the 2110 with all the separate essence. I mean, that's a very powerful thing. And even like sort of like with like closed captioning and other stuff where you always had to take your video and audio to all the devices to embed and de-embed. And this was like, why do I have to take, I mean, say if you're doing UHD, why do I have to take 10 gigs of UHD to embed closed captioning, which is like DC almost.
A few K.
Yeah, or even I consider audio DC too, but I know.
You may have to run serpentine to your car.
I know. I said I'm used to doing a lot of UHD now and like 8 UHDs into 100 gig pipes and stuff, so that's why.
Fair enough.
But yeah, but definitely by having these separate flow and different essences, it allows all this extra capabilities where you can say just take the audio into a simple device that just has a one gig or 100 meg connectors and stuff. So it adds a lot of flexibility, but does add some things you have to watch out for.
Okay, Damien, next question's for you.
Cool.
I feel you're going to stand again. Yes.
My mic.
Now, but I'll just warn you. I got this and one more question to get to, and we got 5 minutes before I start Q&A. So because I feel like I might be opening Pandora's box here when I ask this question. You made a point in one of your responses to me about a beef or a concern about large organizations having too much control over technical adoption. This could potentially reflect directly back onto some of our enthusiasm about new formats, but I'm going to hope you don't throw anything at me.
No.
Could you talk about that concern from your perspective, having once worked for 15 plus years for a monstrous large organization that has traditionally had sway over things like this, but now, working as you do as an independent?
Yeah. Okay. I'm just
Please,
gonna stand in.
yes.
What's cool about working for a broadcaster is you got all the toys. You got everything, right? And if you don't have it, a few years down the road, they're going to buy it for you. What I found in the the private sector is that there's a finite amount of cash, and if we were all going to go and do Dolby Atmos tomorrow, realistically, the cheapest I think I could adopt it for in my room is about 25 grand to do an upgrade, because the I/O needs upgrade. I need more I/O, I need more speakers, and I need the Dolby software, which I happen to have. That, you got 3 or 4 rooms, and you're starting to look at 6 figures just to do a very cheap upgrade. And the question that I get asked all the time is, why do I need this? And I don't really have a very salient response or a good answer for that yet, because it's not part of the broadcast chain yet, but it will be.
Well, and that's going to stop the question, right? For now, you're trying to make the pitch. That's the only time a client would ever ask you, why do I need this?
The pitch is, of course, that this thing will drain back down to stereo and mono again. So all I need to do in order to keep moving in my little 4 production suite house, or my personal house with 1, is I've got to just lay out the cash so that I know that the next 15 years I can still draw an income out of this business. That's really the pitch, is survival. So what I've started doing with studios around town is, rather than talk to them about whether or not they're going to need it, is the idea of how can you save money. You can off-site things to people like me, so I do all of the work, and then we come in and we do a playback in a nice, glorious room, because now you can afford it. You're taking half of the income from the project where I did everything. You're still charging your $400 an hour for your commercial clients, so you're making your margin, and you're making a margin off me. It's not as big as what you maybe hope for off commercials, but the idea is that let's get nimble with the workforce and understand that people like Ron and myself have systems at home and the background, and we can actually do this. And if we're telling you that it needs to be done, which is part of what we're doing today, we're basically telling you this is the next stage. You got to kind of listen to us and go with it, because at some point, if the broadcasters will take this new standard and make it their own. We don't have a choice. That's kind of my beef, is what I was getting at. Is how come these behemoths that are starting to lose ground in terms of subscribership still kind of telling us what we need to do to give to them, and possibly running up production costs. There's got to be a way to bring the production cost down so they still get their product. And that's really, I think, when I do my soul searching, yes, I'm angry about it, that I might have to spend that $25,000 to bring my system up to whatever, but realistically, these people still are 95% of my income is going to TV. So if you're saying that you need it, I've got to deliver it. And that's the end of that story, I think. It's kind of like
We're not
it
saying that
feels
now.
it feels like an invented necessity, because I am of the opinion that my 5.1 mixes, which sound glorious in my suite, don't get heard. And so I'm all about ears. I want to please audiences. I want to connect with all of you, and I want to connect with everybody who hears my stuff. If I think the stereo mix is going to be heard by more people, I'm going to concentrate that. And I will ask that very existential question, why more? But as you guys have pointed out, it doesn't have to be more. This is a scalable solution.
Well, I'm going to make you really happy then, because I'm going to make a guess.
Yeah.
You're never going to see, my guess is you're never going to see a requirement for anything broader or taller than 5.1 as a minimum delivery spec.
Yeah.
You are likely to see the return of permissible 2-channel stereo delivery in a way that for conventional broadcasters in North America, that's effectively anathema now, because if you do deliver 2-channel stereo to us, we're going to upmix it to 5.1, right? But my guess is that is going to go away as well. So that the totality of options that are suggested by the technology, meaning AC4 or AC3 for that matter, it's perfectly allowable to create a single channel payload, 1/0 complete main, all the way up to 5.1, and in AC4 it would be possible to go from 1/0 all the way to 7.1.4, which is 3/4/4. Anyways. So my guess is this all gets real simple for you in the future, because it's ultimately going to be a pitch between yourself and your client, and what they are willing to tolerate versus what you can sell them on.
And my clients are also, let's face it, the mid-level studios here and around the country who are going to look at whether or not the wow factor of speakers hanging above your head and voice being, more directly on the TV in front. Those people are probably going to have to look at laying up the dough, because all of their other people, all of their competitors are going to do it, right? So as an independent operator, what I got to weigh is how much of that work do I do at home so that I can, again, walk into one of those studios with something ready to go. I can do it through a 5.1, as you've already told me this before. Yeah. That's great news. I just maybe want to mess with the Dolby Atmos monitor and all that, make sure all my routing's good, and then I walk into a bigger room and boom.
And do it.
Yeah. And I think as an independent operator, that's kind of exciting, but also I'm going to probably invent a necessity to add more speakers to my system, because I'm a gear pig, right?
There you go. Okay, last question. Josh, was it Josh yesterday with the linear delivery? Was that you? Yeah, but yes, it was in your keynote, Josh. So a linear and predictable delivery of our content is long gone. Gone are the days of us physically doing a layback onto a piece of tape and then being able to hand it to someone or carry it ourselves down to master control and really maintaining a sort of a chain of custody of the asset. Right, not only the precedent of the post-sound department, for instance, being responsible for that final moment of marriage of sound to picture, but also knowing definitively that it was going to air. Nowadays, of course, with a few mouse clicks, we take a piece of content, we chuck it into the maw of this voracious sort of content management system that just sort of gobbles up stuff as fast as you can drag icons into it. And from there, the bottom of that thing, it doesn't look like a piping bag. It looks like a sieve. There's just stuff's going everywhere because there's all those hands in the cookie jar wanting, whether it's digital or mobile, whether it's the conventional channel, whether it's international sales, who knows, all of the myriad places that we're chucking content, mostly without them telling us ahead of time that they're going to do it. I suppose for you, Ron, when someone comes in the door and the booking on your work order says CBC Digital, that's probably a good clue that at least, maybe even foremost, it's going to go to some digital platform versus if it, says, something else, some other,
Generally, you just have to assume that it's going to go everywhere.
Going to go everywhere.
Yeah.
So that's the question. Do you necessarily approach the fundamentals of your mix differently because of that new reality? I mean, it's not that new. I mean, we've been creeping up on this for the last 10 years, but now it's sort of ever present, and many broadcast organizations are sort of having this sort of digital first strategy. And you even mentioned yesterday, I think, some changes to your org chart that very clearly reflect the preeminence of these digital sides of the business. Do you approach your mixes any differently, Ron?
I do, bearing in mind that right now we have a set of level standards for broadcast, and most of the broadcasters across North America are the same. We have a target loudness of -24 LKFS, and we aim for that target. There's a very wide allowable dynamic range within that spec. That if I'm mixing for something that's going to wind up on somebody's iPhone and they're trying to listen to it on a bus, they're going to miss all of the quiet stuff because they can't crank it up loud enough to hear it all. And so basically there are a couple of different standards that haven't been adopted by most of the broadcasters yet, but it's certainly in place in Spotify, Tidal, Apple Music, where they have a much louder playback with a potentially lower dynamic range, in order to allow people to elevate the level above the background noise when they are using a mobile device. So I keep that in mind when I'm mixing, particularly if I'm mixing a show like Fifth Estate, which is the kind of show that people would consume, off of a mobile device because they just want to know the sort of newsy aspect of the story. I still have to hit my target loudness of -24, but I will use tighter compression, less peaks, etc., because you don't want stuff to just disappear when people listen to it. Now, that said, we are looking at CBC in the future. There's been a real push, particularly from CBC Music, to align our digital streaming levels more closely with other aspects of the industry. I think Spotify is -12, Tidal is -16, Apple Music is -18, but everything based on the AES spec should be not quieter than -20 and not louder than -16. So I like to keep that in mind when I'm doing my mix, so that if we do make the change to the server that scales everything up to we may wind up going to -18. We haven't. Those are things to be determined in the future. But I want to be able to do that without having some arbitrary limiter imposing what happens to the peaks in my mix. So yeah, I think much more now about dynamic range as I'm mixing for digital.
Fantastic.
So that means there's two separate mixes being exported.
No,
One mix that gets scaled.
we print a stereo mix, which is for the purposes of descriptive video.
Yeah.
And we print a 5.1 mix. The only mix that is delivered to our server for broadcast is the 5.1.
Right.
And it is mixed down within all of our servers and things for all of the other distribution,
Including the web.
using the standard ITU fold down. So including the stuff that goes out on Facebook, YouTube,
Okay.
wherever else it goes. And that's something that we are looking at in much more detail going into the future to figure out the best possible way to do that. Because right now, it can be problematic, particularly if you're switching out to an offsite delivery of an ad that's being inserted in the middle of your -24 program that has been mixed to -12.
Yeah.
So,
It's a concern at the moment.
yeah.
Sure is. Gentlemen, I have many more questions and would happily keep poking you for a long, long time, but we've reached the point where I have to ask if there are any questions because we have 6 minutes remaining in this interval. Oh, look at that. Hey, Blair, you want to come and help with microphones because I'm kind of stranded up here. Mind your ears there, Josh.
I have, I think, what's a simple question, or at least a simple-minded one, and that is, how far is IP going to permeate through the system that starts with the production site and goes to the broadcaster and goes to the cable company and comes into my living room?
Say that again.
Okay. How far is IP going to be permeating the system from the production site to the broadcaster, to the cable company, to my room, my living room, in terms of, say, quality and control?
Well, there's going to be, and I'll let Lee answer the question, but really the IP that we're talking about is going to end at my back door as the broadcaster. It may be IP, in fact, all the way to your smart TV or to your set-top box, depending on your provider, your BDU, or how you're consuming it. I mean, it's definitively IP when it hits this, but it's a different flavor altogether. But Lee, maybe you have a more comprehensive answer.
Well, I would say it's a bit pretty much end-to-end, because I mean, now there are microphones which are IP-based. There are speakers you can get which are IP-based. I mean, all the production infrastructure is IP. I mean, within the facility, I mean, it'll change to your home. It's a slightly different IP system, but I mean, there's no reason why right from the microphone all the way to your home speaker can't be IP.
Yeah. And for many consumers, that's already the case. It's already only IP coming into the home. I mean, it only stops. I maybe not surprisingly, I'm a Bell 5 subscriber. It only stops being IP when it leaves, when it hits the TV. I mean, essentially, but the only thing that's arriving at the set-top box is data. It doesn't happen. It's not 2110. I mean, we're not going to be pushing the same kinds of containerized and really big, fat pieces of bandwidth to the home as we're dealing with internally or upstream.
I think that was more what I was getting at, was simply that, I mean, let's say the Much Music Video Awards.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a whole heck of a lot of stuff going on site there.
Yeah.
Which gets condensed down so that the broadcaster can broadcast it, which then may or may not get condensed to the cable companies.
It will, and then it'll get condensed again.
And then it'll get condensed again. And
the fact that it looks like anything in your living room is kind of miraculous. Because what starts out as at minimum in HD at 1.5 gigabits per second, you've got tiny fraction of that by the time it hits your iPhone or your 65-inch OLED. The fact that it looks like anything is kind of remarkable.
Yeah. But the exciting part of the IP is that, with smart people building technologies, is the infrastructure in, say, a control room right now is still copper-based, right? You got a signal that goes from there to there. It's still going through your router. A lot of it. This is going to be the manufacturers have to give us the solutions to purchase to change things slowly to IP, even right down to the consoles. Eventually, I can envision a world where your mixing console is still tactile, because nothing mixes better than what's between somebody's ears, and the tactile nature of moving, but it's all going to be driven by IP infrastructure underneath. It could be a touch screen, it could be mechanical faders, but everything below that level is going to be an IP solution. And it's going to greatly reduce the number of wires, cables, power consumption, but we're not there yet. A lot of the infrastructure that went in, when HD went in, and late adopters of HD, they're going, hey, I just built this plant 10 years ago. I'm not going to rebuild everything now. But as things get changed out, slowly everything's going to migrate to IP instead of copper.
Although, say, it's available now.
It is available.
It may be more for the bleeding edge or the early adopters, but, and yes, you probably put in your facility recently, you're not going to upgrade. But if you want to, I said, you can buy an IP microphone. They're on the market.
Yeah.
The consoles that are pure IP. I mean, all these things are available today if you want to buy them.
Yeah, I mean, Ron, talked last night about the remarkable development in Montreal of the new Maison. That's a greenfield, effectively a greenfield build, and yes, because it is ready for prime time now. We're not really waiting for anything, but you're not necessarily going to throw out a still paying investment just because there's a different way to do the old job. Any more questions? Josh has a question. Oh, this will be good. Uh-oh.
No.
Get a helmet, guys.
No, it's just more of a comment. I mean, so one of the concerns that we've had to deal with historically is, to your point, it's a miracle that through all of the processing and the reductions in re-encoding and everything else, it's a miracle that it actually looks like anything at all after it arrives at the home set-top box. One of the things that I think has been really interesting, certainly in the UHD and Atmos side, is that a lot of the leaders that we've been working with have been on the European side. Working with Canal Plus, for example, they've been really excited about all this because they're actually pushing like a 25 meg or 30 meg UHD HEVC stream to Apple TV, which looks incredible compared to all of their terrestrial offerings. And so they're actually seeing IP in terms from a delivery standpoint as an opportunity to actually raise the bar and compete kind of in a different way. And it's also enabled kind of a lot of freedom in the way as you're describing 2110 and the ability to have all of the different kind of components and kind of pick and choose what you need. From a delivery standpoint, the ability to have your stereo, your multi-channel, your Atmos all kind of running in parallel, alongside actually alternative camera angles and the ability to put up, I can't remember which they did, but they did it was a car race, and the experience in their app was the ability to actually put up your couple of your favorite drivers in-car cameras, plus the track wide, and then choose which particular audio track you want to go with it. I'm interested to see what that's going to change in terms of production when we start thinking about this notion that there actually are going to probably be parallel video payloads, perhaps viewed simultaneously, and a bit of a choose-your-own-adventure from a consumer standpoint.
I think that's the best way to end this. And it closes the loop back with a possible complaint or a perceived cynicism about why do the new thing, and it speaks to the why is a broadcaster going to sort of Bigfoot the rest of the industry. But that's actually the point right there. Just forget format. Just forget format. The whole point of a migration to either a fully object-based or a hybridized object-based environment is to fully divorce the content creation environment from the content consumption environment in a way that has never been possible. And if none of our clients ever want to tolerate speakers hanging from the ceiling, it doesn't mean that these guys aren't going to be compelled to build the infrastructure to support it, because those kind of ideas are going to let our clients and our corporate brothers and sisters find new ways to monetize the asset. And as soon as someone has figured out a new and clever way to make someone reach into their pocket every month, engineers are going to build it, and we're going to get to fill the pipes. And that infrastructure that's going to let them monetize it is going to make us be able to have arbitrarily discussions for ourselves about, this is going to be great in 714, dude. Okay? Gentlemen, thank you. Thank you for your forbearance.